Good morning and welcome back to the Sage Sorority Podcast. I'm your host, Chantel. How are y'all doing, guys? Happy Thursday. Hope everyone's having a fab one. We're not going to go too long with the intro today because, as you can tell by today's title, the therapy episode, it is a chunkier episode, I will say. And there's a lot kind of on my mind and a lot that I want to go through. So I want to make sure that this episode doesn't run too long. And as with anything that is so important to our health and our mindset and our well-being, you always want to consult a doctor or a trained professional. I am neither, just want to share this information with you guys. So let's go. Firstly, I just want to introduce kind of why I wanted to make an episode on therapy and a little bit of like soft kind of thoughts on it before I get into more in-depth thoughts. So therapy is often talked about on a very surface level and sometimes even casual level, which I don't inherently think is a bad thing. I am fully grateful that therapy and the conversation of therapy and the suggestion of therapy is so much more commonplace than I think it's ever been in modern life. And I know the difference from now versus 5 years ago versus 10 years ago. So I'm so glad that therapy is a very common thing to be discussing amongst peers, amongst coworkers, in relationships, so on and so forth. So whether you've been in therapy for years or you're thinking about starting, or maybe you've had some experiences that have left you wondering if it's right for you, this episode is going to kind of touch on all of that. Because there's a lot of nuance when it comes to therapy that doesn't often get explained or dove into when it is in casual conversation, like cost, accessibility, emotional honesty, finding the right person, etc., etc. I, for one, love to speak about my own experiences as well as giving you guys advice on what you can do for your own life. I have been in and out of therapy since I was 18, and TLDR, I'm so grateful for it. The act and the ritual and the reverence of therapy has fully changed my life and has impacted me in ways that I just could never really articulate or give enough kudos to. And it is nothing that I could buy in a store. And for that, I'm extremely grateful. I think that I've had a lot of different therapy experiences, some loaded, some light, good ones, awkward ones, moments that felt like breakthroughs, moments that felt like very expensive conversations, which is also not bad, not digging on that at all. And I think that there's something valuable in just getting a little bit more authentic about it, about what this process actually looks like beyond kind of quote unquote doing the work. So let's go. I first went to therapy when I was 18. So I was working at a place that actually just had really good insurance, and we got 4 free sessions. And I highly recommend that if you are interested in therapy, or even if you are in therapy, wherever you are in that kind of journey, look into your benefits and your insurance. You don't know what is covered and what isn't covered unless you look, and I highly recommend. Some employers do it by a cash-based system, like, okay, maybe you get $500 or 500 pounds of X amount of discretionary coverage. Some actually build in psychological or therapy. Some have it separate as like a health spend. My place gave me sessions. I have another friend. She gets 8 sessions, which I think is incredible. So definitely highly recommend, before we go further, look into your insurance. You never know what may be covered before you have to kind of pay out of pocket. So this felt like a really good stroke of luck because I was quite young and I really couldn't have afforded it otherwise. And therapy is something that always interests me because psychology is something that has always interested me. So I didn't have that social hurdle to get over when it came to therapy. I was pretty private about it initially, but I wasn't ashamed to go for myself because I liked the idea of someone who's incredibly knowledgeable that I can speak to about the way I'm feeling. Honestly, I'm still like that. So it was never weird or shameful for me. I was grateful that I had the experience. I think I've mentioned this before on the podcast, but she was like 80 and it just wasn't a good fit. So that's why also when people say, oh, I went to therapy and it just wasn't a good fit and I never went back, I'm sorry, it's a poor fucking excuse. It is a poor fucking excuse because you do not just quit something that's good for you just because it doesn't feel good the first time. We don't accept that when it comes to going to the gym, and we don't accept that when it comes to eating vegetables and eating healthy. So I'm not going to accept that when it comes to your own mental health, well-being. and also the mental health and well-being for everyone around you, right? Right. So she just wasn't a good fit. Nothing discrediting her. She was quite an acclaimed family and relationship therapist, but I was 18 and I was dealing with things like self-confidence and things like that. This was a woman that was just far ahead in the game than maybe what I was dealing with, and someone that was also so young. I'm sure I was the youngest person to walk into her practice in a very long time. Because you'll also find that psychologists, for example, or therapists that work with children, they don't work with adults. There usually isn't that double back. So I'm sure I was the youngest person that she had seen in a very long time. So I kind of just did the 4 sessions, and I still liked it because I liked the practice and the ritual of it, like sitting in someone's home at the time and being able to talk to them very freely and very candidly and not having that immediate judgment or blowback that maybe you might get from family or your closest friends. So although it didn't stick, I stuck with therapy. The pattern for me has always been a bit of inconsistency with therapy. I've been doing it on and off since I was 18, and sometimes life will get busy and I'll fall off my routine. I'm great at starting, not always the greatest at sustaining, but I still do believe in the practice. I really do. Over the years, I've done therapy in Canada and the UK and virtually, especially during COVID and when I was traveling. And what I've noticed is that the approach, the cultural context, and even the way therapists are trained, it all really varies so much. There are so many variables in therapy, and that's probably the biggest reason why I wanted to make this episode, because there's so many variables in who you're talking to, what you're talking about, how you're going about it, and the methodologies through which they are helping you. In some places, it's very structured. There's a clinical approach. In others, it feels more like a guided conversation. Both can work. It really just depends on how you respond and essentially what moves the needle for you. Okay, so I briefly want to touch on the types of therapy, what's out there, and who it's for. And I have to add a disclaimer that there's a lot of different therapy styles and methodologies out there. You truly have to just find what works for you. That can be through a ton of research, but I'm a big fan of a little bit of research and a lot of action. So just get in there and see what works. Another kind of asterisk to that is there's a lot of overlap between modalities. So it's rare that you're going to find someone that just focuses on one single type of methodology or modality, and then that's it. There's a lot of overlap, so you don't have to be too rigid with that, because you can usually find maybe 2 or 3 that you like and find counselors, therapists, psychologists, whatever, that work with that. So we'll go through a few kind of mainstream and very popular therapies, and then we'll get into a few more niche ones. So first would be CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy. That is a goal-oriented, structured therapy that focuses on identifying and changing unhelpful thought patterns and behaviors. If you ever hear people think about thought loops, that's kind of part of that CBT dialogue. This is really ideal for someone that is suffering from a lot of anxiety, mild, I would say, to moderate depression, overthinking, phobias, and maybe like perfectionism. CBT can often be more shorter term and is very solution focused, right? So maybe like for phobias, we are going to give you like that exposure therapy, things like that. Again, doesn't have to be shorter term, but that is commonplace. So, just something to know. Next is psychodynamic therapy. So this is really rooted in Freudian theory, which is exploring unconscious drives, childhood patterns, how past relationships really shape your present. This is really good for people who want to understand themselves deeply and are open to long-term work. It's very insight heavy and often not as solution-based. When I first started doing therapy in the UK, I encountered a lot of therapists that focused on this dynamic, and I found myself being very unsatisfied because at that point I had done a lot of work. So I know kind of where things are coming from, and I wanted more help moving the needle. You can find people that can help you be goal-oriented and also give heavy insight. You can absolutely find both, but just be mindful that if you feel like you're sitting across from someone and you're doing a lot of discussion without necessarily being able to move forward and or apply it and or wanting more feedback from the therapist, this could be why. Next is like a humanistic, person-centered therapy. This, I think you will find a huge overlap with most therapists. You will find them that have a humanistic approach. So it's based on empathy, unconditional positive regard, and a very strong therapist-client relationship. The therapist doesn't interpret, they reflect. So this is really good for anyone who needs space to feel seen, validated, and safely heard. It can feel too passive if you're looking for challenge or growth direction. But if you feel like you're just desperately looking for someone to validate, see, hear your experiences, this can be a really good match. I also think that if you have suffered, I don't want to say minor trauma, but I think if you have in your life or even recently, a humanistic, person-centered therapist can be really helpful, at least before you get to the next step of maybe like a CBT. I also think a humanistic approach is really good for those that have a strong fear of therapy and are really just looking to get into the ritual and the practice of talking to someone. Next is integrative therapy. And this is more of like a blended model that pulls from several schools, CBT, psychodynamic, humanistic, etc., just depending on what you need. So this is ideal for people who want something tailored rather than textbook. And this is very therapist dependent in terms of both quality and style. Most therapists I've encountered have an integrative therapy model, so it's really tailored to you and you can kind of adapt and flow as needed. And then fifth would be coaching. Obviously, I offer coaching. You guys know, link is in the show notes. And what it is this is not therapy, but it can be deeply helpful. Again, a really good option for those that maybe have a little bit of stigma around therapy, don't like the formalization of everything, and are just looking for maybe like a peer to talk to and want to get into that routine and that habit. It focuses on present to future movement. This is about moving you forward, less about childhood thought patterns, downloads, things like that. And it's great for goals, clarity, and/or accountability. This is great for high functioning people who just want a bit of clarity, direction, and momentum, especially when it comes to career, identity, and/or life phases. This is not a replacement for trauma and/or clinical work, and I cannot emphasize that enough. If you know that there is something deep and important that you need to discuss, you do need to also meet people where they're at, and you need to be with someone who can hold that space for you, both in a therapy way and a clinical way. And these are a few of the more niche and growing modalities. I wanted to add this in for maybe people who are a little bit more familiar with therapy and are looking to deepen their own practice of self-actualization and maybe want to explore like different ideas to do that. So one is internal family systems, or it's also called IFS. And this explores the different parts of your personality. So that would be like shadow self, inner child, inner critic, overachiever. It's based on the idea or the theory that we are all made up of sub-personalities. This is really good for people who intellectualize a lot or feel conflicted inside, like I want to do good, but then I feel drawn to do bad, or things like that. It's really great for trauma, perfectionism, or really good for people who self-sabotage. Next is eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, also known as EMDR. This has made a little bit of rounds because I think Miley Cyrus went viral a couple months ago because she had a really good experience with it. But then people were saying that it wasn't EMDR in the comments, but some people were saying it was. So again, so much of this is subjective to where you go and who you work with. But EMDR is apparently the gold standard when it comes to trauma. So it uses guided eye movements to help reprocess traumatic memories and reduce their emotional charge. So it's really good for trauma survivors, PTSD, or anyone with really disturbing memories that they just cannot shake. I will say that of everything I've listed so far, this is definitely the most intense. EMDR, from what I know, I've never done it, is highly intense and highly emotional, but can be wildly effective. Like from what I've seen online, people that have done it, I've seen a few people say that they did nothing for them, like everything. But the vast majority of people or feedback that I've seen on EMDR is that it was life-changing. I think therapy in general is life-changing, but people really speak highly of EMDR. So if you have suffered or are suffering with any of those kind of aforementioned issues, I think that looking into EMDR could be wildly helpful for you. Next is somatic therapy. And this is kind of like gaining its traction in the therapy community, I would say lately. One of the therapists that I have seen in England, she is now a fully somatic therapist as well. So what it is it focuses on the mind-body connection. So it uses breath work, movement, body awareness to process stored emotions. Now, stay with me. I know that some people feel like that's very woo because it can sound very woo, right? Like if I'm going into a therapist's office, and we're doing breath work, it's like I could literally just do that at my community center. But stay with me because it does have like some serious data behind it. And obviously, we know, especially if we're willing to discuss mental health with a therapist or even begin that idea of therapy, the mind and the body are deeply intertwined and deeply connected. This is ideal for people who are stuck in their head, maybe feel disconnected from their body, or have even physical symptoms linked to stress or trauma. I think that this covers a lot of people. I think even more people than maybe people will realize. And I can even speak to being disconnected from my own body when I had quite a little bit of a mini breakthrough with one of my therapists that I'll discuss later on. Also, we have existential therapy. So firstly, I will say that this is more philosophical than practical. But if you are someone who loves a good brain scratch, this can be very helpful for you in terms of like navigating, So it helps to tackle like big questions, meaning, mortality, identity, freedom. And it's less about fixing and more about expansion. So it's really expanding your inner world. And it's really good for people going through major life moments, the big three: moving, death and divorce, loss, things like that. And then finally, we have schema therapy. So this integrates CBT, which we said before, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, attachment theory, and psychodynamic therapy. This really helps to identify deeply rooted life patterns or schemas, essentially, developed in childhood. This is ideal for people who are stuck in repeating emotional cycles or toxic relationship patterns. If you are someone, you're like, I want to get married, I want to meet my person, and I keep finding myself in situationships, or I keep finding myself with cheaters, or I keep finding myself with da-da-da-da, highly recommend schema therapy. You are literally in a deep rooted pattern that will take some time to kind of undo because you have to understand what you're doing, what's your part in it, and how did you even get there. And I think schema therapy can be very helpful with things like that. So this is honestly just a few. I listed 10, but if you know therapy and you know the art of psychology, it can go on and on and on. So this is just to give you a little bit to start with and hopefully get your mind going. And just a reminder, there's lots of overlap between these approaches and lots of therapists mix methods. You don't need to become an expert in therapeutic modalities before you start therapy. You just need to start. So if you are new to this, I would highly recommend start low cost. I know I said start humanistic, but I would also add to that and just start low cost. Like start with students. You can often find students that are like PhD students or master's students and work with them. I did that in Toronto for quite some time. If you live near universities, they're often supervised and also really eager to help. And don't worry, when I say supervised, I don't necessarily mean there's always someone there. Sometimes there is. I have had that, but often not. It just means that if they're a student, they will share their notes with the professor. They don't share any incriminating details. It will either be fake name or it'll be like Jane Doe 47. And then they'll kind of like discuss. That is very common for anyone in the mental health space that's still a student. So don't let that put you off. Community mental health clinics in Toronto, I know there's CAMH. There's also psychologists and therapists that will offer what you'll see is called a sliding scale. So a sliding scale is a term in psychology and therapists for people of low income or just don't necessarily have the means. So if you see a therapist or someone that you like, reach out for a consultation call or a discovery call if they offer it, or just email them and say, hey, do you offer sliding scale? Do you have sliding scale rates available? They might. And maybe the rate on the website will say 150 pounds, but they offer sliding scale of 100 or they offer sliding scale of 125. It's just very helpful, especially if you are paying out of pocket and maybe you are single or young or in school or just low income or a mix of everything at this point. The goal at the beginning, I highly recommend this, is frequency over like prestige. I think that with therapy, you got to get your reps in. I don't think that you should find the most prestigious person or like the most perfect person per se. Yes, you should get on with your therapist, but I think if you've really never done it before, if you've never gone inside before, inside your soul, inside your mind in that way, I think the most impactful thing in the beginning is going to be the ritual, which is meeting the same person every week, every 2 weeks, every month, and growing with that person before you start to scale up. Get in the habit first, figure out what you need, then you can be pickier. I'd also like to say that your life doesn't have to be falling apart for you to go to therapy. I think people have a skewed idea that, well, I'm fine, so why would I go to therapy? And that's not really what it's about. You know, I don't subscribe to that when it comes to the doctor. Like, well, I'm healthy, so why would I get a checkup? It's like, no, you get a checkup, you get a physical. Oh, I brush my teeth every day. Why would I go to the dentist? Like, that's not how this works. Our mental health deserves just as much attention, especially because if you don't have your mental health, you don't have much. That's literally how this works. So keeping our mental health robust and strong and fit is just as important as any other muscle that we have in our body and any other part that we have on our body. I think that therapy doesn't only have to be used as a crisis intervention. Some of my favorite sessions, I would literally be walking to the office and I'm like, I have nothing to talk about today. An hour later, I actually had a lot to talk about. Like, I will literally be like, I have nothing to say. And it will just literally flow out of me like a fire hydrant. It's actually insane. It's happened so many times that I wouldn't cancel because I'm like, oh, I have nothing to talk about. No, I always have something to talk about. And I think the same will be for you as well. If you stay ready, you don't have to get ready. And things can be stable and therapy can still be beneficial, still be helpful, still be wildly life-changing. That's when you can actually do the deeper work instead of just putting out fires all the time. We want to be responsive to our lives and not reactive. I hope this makes sense. So just a few personal things that I've noticed about therapy. So initially when I moved to the UK, I was like, okay, well, I need to find a therapist in London. And what I was running up against in the UK, which was really weird, was one, mostly it was psychodynamic therapy, as in very insight heavy. The therapist would say minimal throughout the 45 minutes or 50 minutes, and I'm just yapping away. And that's okay for a little bit, but I really do need to have some sort of dialogue with my therapist, especially if we're going to build a relationship. So that was what I noticed, number one. And then two, this is more from like a billing point of view, is I went to a few people who, let's just say I want to see the therapist on Thursdays at 1 p.m. I would have to commit to that day and time, and that would be my day and time, which means I would have to prepay so that I'm always kind of built into that slot, and I wouldn't be able to change. And I didn't like that. I found it very restrictive, and to me, it goes against what we're trying to do here. Luckily, you push through enough times, you will find people that don't do that, which was very helpful for me because I didn't like that. I might be able to see you Thursday on 1 p.m., but what if I'm traveling next week? And now you're saying I've bought that slot and I have to email you like ways in advance to try and change it if I'm even able to change it. It really put me off from doing therapy with therapists in the UK. If you are listening to this and you're a London girl and you have a therapist that you love that doesn't do that, please tell me, because then I ended up having a US therapist who I saw on Zoom, who I could book whenever I wanted. I paid her on PayPal and it was very easy. Also, like, therapists do not want to take card. That was another thing. That's like a big thing in the UK in general. A lot of service industries don't want to take credit card. And if they do, they don't take Amex. Anyways, that's not the point of this episode, but I did notice that a lot. And I just want to get my points. Like, I'm not going to just give you cash because you don't want to pay merchant fees. Like, no, absolutely not. Anyways, not the point of the episode, but these are things that I really came up against. And I feel like when we talk about therapy, we also have to talk about costs and billing and access. And yes, you are paying for someone's time and expertise, but this is also a service-based business and the service needs to make sense for me. Does that make sense? I know it does. I know I'm not talking crazy. But whatever model you subscribe to, it keeps you consistent when you are seeing someone on a regular basis. Therapy is so much more effective when you are seeing someone on a regular basis because then you don't also have to spend each session catching up because you're in a groove with that person. It's no different than really going to the gym, right? If you go to the gym every week, you're going to see far more of an impact than if you were to go every month. And if you go to the gym every day, you are going to see far more of an impact than if you were to go every week. That is just how it is. Chips make chunks, right? I also want to add in the fact that you do not have to stay with a therapist if it's not working for you. Now, I think there is a caveat here is that you can't quit too soon. I say 4 sessions, 4 to 6 sessions. So a month and a half. And that's regularly every week before you quit. If each of those sessions you're not getting what you want and you are fully explaining what you're looking for to the therapist and they're just not delivering, then I think it's fair to cut it loose and find someone else. Personally, I want a therapist who will gently challenge me, who will peel back layers, who will notice my blind spots, who will notice when I'm bullshitting myself, who will ask the questions that I'm not asking. And you might get that with someone right off the top, but you might not. And you might work with someone and you're like, no, we've spent enough time together where I don't feel like this is maybe going anywhere, or I'm not feeling lighter, or I'm not feeling expansive, or I'm not walking away with tools. I fully give you permission to find someone else. If it's not working, it's not working. You're not being rude. You're not failing at therapy. They're not also bad at their job. Sometimes the fit is just not there. And that's just data for you to use. It's not an issue on either one's part. You let them know it's just not a fit. If they want feedback, give it to them and make sure you stick to the facts. I don't feel like I'm getting what I need out of this, and what I need is XYZ. And if they want to bridge that gap, let them. And if not, it's okay to find someone else. Like I said before, I've had some pretty good breakthroughs and I've had some really good experiences with therapists. I've never had like a terrible experience with a therapist. I've had some that are like not that great, like the woman that was in her 80s and then the woman that was trying to like really hardcore sell me like this slot. And I was like, this is a no. But I've had some really good experiences. And the first was this Black woman who was based in Tennessee, I believe, who I worked with virtually. And this was like kind of post-COVID 2021 and 2022. Loved her. She was direct, warm, very friendly. She had this way of like calling me out, but it was never really judgmental. We worked together for about a year. And then I started to sense that we had hit our cap. And this is what I mean by it's all good. Like, I loved her. I would recommend her, but I still felt like I hit my cap with her after a while. Like we had gone as far as we are going to go. It wasn't that anything was wrong. It's just that naturally, I am someone that am very committed to this for the rest of my life. I have no issue being in and out of therapy for the rest of my life. And I have to grow in that practice as well. And if I can find a therapist or I meet a therapist that I can grow with, great. But if not, it's also like a natural progression. And I think that that's okay. She one time asked me something, I can't remember what she asked me. And she was like, how do you feel about it? And I thought about it. And then I said what I thought. And she was like, no, that's not what I asked. I asked, how did you feel about it? And it really like got me because it was like, oh, fuck, like those are actually not the same things. And why am I only making this connection now? And it was very much like a brain scratch in a really good way because I'm looking at her and she's looking at me and I was like, oh, like, and it took me quite some time to figure out how I felt about it because I was just intellectualizing the moment, which is also very common for someone who does that often or is overfunctioning or whatever. And it was a fabulous moment and one that I don't think I'll ever forget. Then recently, I've had an amazing therapist in England who I love dearly. She's kind of taking a break right now. And that's another thing too, is that you will also find therapists and then sometimes they take a break from private practice. They might take time off to run retreats or read a book or just personal time because obviously doing this kind of work is very heavy. Of course, you will find lots of therapists and psychologists that stick with private practice throughout. They don't take any breaks. But it is not uncommon for a therapist to say, oh, I'm actually writing a book, or oh, I'm doing my PhD, or oh, I'm doing my master's, and I'll be off for a few months or whatever. It's actually not that uncommon. One thing that I loved about her was that she understands the cultural context of being Canadian in England. And I love that because she understands it from a cultural point of view, and she also understands it from like an immigration point of view. Now, those are pretty minor things in my life, but it's nice to have someone that can really relate to maybe some deep pains that you have, even if it's just pains in your day-to-day. She's also one of the first therapists I've ever had who's much closer to my age and my lifestyle, and that relatability has been very refreshing. There's less explaining context, and we can just kind of more dive into things. With that being said, I don't subscribe to the idea that you need a therapist who is just like you. I do not subscribe to that idea. And also, when people say that, I think it's an excuse, because most of the time when I've seen them say that, it is an excuse. I've seen Black women say they only want to speak to another Black woman, which is fine. Like, do your thing. I'm not going to tell you who you should spend your money with. But if you then circle back and say you just can't find one, you're lying. There are tons of Black women therapists. There are loads, US, Canada, and England. I've seen all three. I had a Black therapist Black psychologist, excuse me, when I was in Toronto. She lived outside of the city and we used to Zoom together. She's incredible. They're everywhere. So like, get on your Zoom, stop lying, stop making excuses. I just find that people do that really often. And I also think that sometimes speaking to someone, it depends on what you want to talk about, right? Sometimes speaking to someone who's different than you can offer clarity in ways that like you don't have. And for me, I've been able to benefit from both. When I had a Black woman therapist, did I benefit from like a cultural kinship? Absolutely. Now that I have a younger Canadian, white, and Indigenous therapist, do we click on some cultural and do we have cultural kinship? Absolutely. Like, have I talked to therapists that I have zero cultural kinship with at all? Of course. Like, everyone has a benefit, and I don't think you should let those things hang you up. By all means, go and find your preference, but don't let that be a roadblock for you. I will say though, some people say they like to speak to male therapists. I've never met a male therapist. Like, I've never engaged with one. And I just don't think I ever would. LOL. Maybe I should, just to really like push myself, but like my gut is like absolutely not. I also want to talk about the fact that sometimes therapy isn't fun. And this is a huge umbrella that when we talk about therapy very casually, this gets missed a lot of the times. I've had sessions that have left me feeling completely loaded. Like, I would have to walk home in complete silence after, just to process everything that had come up. That does not mean I'm broken, and that does not mean the session was bad. It is just part of the progress. I've had people say that they leave therapy feeling so light, so airy, and on cloud nine. And sometimes I'm a little jealous because I'm like, why don't I feel like that when I go to therapy? That doesn't mean that their experience is any less than or frivolous or better than mine. It's just an experience. And we're all having the experience that we should have wherever we are. Sometimes you feel great, sometimes you don't. But the ones that unearth things and you didn't expect to find, that is what you're there for. Like, that is the whole point of it, is unearthing. Sometimes you unearth and you feel good. Sometimes you unearth and you feel bad. The goal isn't to leave every session necessarily feeling great or feeling amazing, but you should leave feeling something and feeling like what you've touched and what you've learned and what you've gained is authentic and real to you. What I will say is that if you know in your heart that therapy is something you should do and you've been avoiding it and then you get to it, it will probably not be great initially. It's going to unearth a lot, because if you've been avoiding therapy, chances are you've been avoiding yourself, and it's going to be death by a fire hydrant, essentially, because it's going to be a lot, and there may be lots of tears, and there may be a little bit of confusion and even a little bit of anger for people in your life, maybe parents, family, people that have let you down, experiences that you've had, maybe guilt, maybe anger at yourself for putting yourself in situations, all of those things. So when I have had friends that are like, I'm ready to do therapy and I'm ready to start that, I always tell them, it might not be enjoyable at first, but you can't quit. It's no different than like lifting weights. Lifting weights is really fucking hard. Running on a treadmill or doing your first 2K, doing your first 5K, it's hard. You've never moved your body in that way. You're sore, you're out of breath. Being overweight and having to lose 30 pounds, that's hard work. This is no different. So I always want to give that caveat, because I do think that that gets missed a lot in the, why don't you just go to therapy? It's like, this is not a club where you're going to like go jam it out and then go home. It's its own kind of club, but you know what I mean. Okay, and my last point, and this is a really important one that also gets missed in the therapy discussion, is Sometimes therapy doesn't work, okay? So just stick with me. So here's the thing. Being in therapy doesn't automatically mean you are doing the work. And I know that that's a little bit of a bastardization because we often say, she's not doing the work, he's not doing the work, I'm doing the work, I've done the work, etc., etc. But just because someone is in therapy, we need to go a little bit more micro with that. We don't know what they're talking about in therapy. People lie to their therapists all the time. Not big dramatic lies, but small omissions, half-truths, making themselves sound more self-aware than they actually are. And I get it. You want your therapist to like you. We are brainwashed that way. We want to be likable. You want to seem like a good client. You don't want to admit to the petty thoughts or the behaviors that you're not proud of. I've definitely told therapists things that I'm like, ooh, like, should I tell her this? And it's like, yeah, like, this is the experience that I'm paying for. I want her to understand all of me. And also, like, this is her job to fucking sit with that discomfort. That's how this works. But emotional dishonesty, even subtle emotional dishonesty, is more common than people think. And in therapy, it is a quicksand because for high functioning women, especially, therapy can become performance. You know the right things to say, you understand the concepts, and you can analyze your patterns beautifully. But analysis is not change. And this is something that not to say I had to learn the hard way, but I've learned the stark way. Like, knowing the thing is not doing the thing, is not understanding the thing deep to your soul. And I think this goes for a lot of people. Understanding why you do something is not the same as doing something different. I'm going to repeat that. Knowing why you do something is not the same as doing something different. When you know better, you do better. No, I'm sorry. Maybe I'll do an episode one day on like quotes that I just don't really agree with, because a lot of people know better and they do not fucking do better. Now you could say, well, obviously they don't know, but that's not the point of it. The point is you being able to intellectualize something does not mean you're going to do something better or different. A good therapist will gently challenge you, not just validate you. Though notice when you're intellectualizing instead of feeling, like mine did, when you're talking about your emotions instead of experiencing them. If your therapist just nods and agrees with everything you say, you're paying someone to just be a friend. And I really want to drive home on this last point because I think it's so important for those that are in therapy, those that are considering it, and those that are kind of in the middle. Like, a lot of people use therapy for very different reasons. Emotional venting, but not integration, obviously, like we discussed. Performance, trying to look self-aware without actually confronting anything. Validation seeking. They want their therapist to co-sign with their existing view. This is huge. This is very huge. You see this a lot with couples therapy. And also control. I'm doing the work. They are the problem. I feel like you see these two in more couples therapy rather than individual therapy. But hey, if you're a therapist and I'm wrong, chime in. Emotional work is the practice of becoming emotionally accountable, self-reflective, and behaviorally different over time. And this is the most important part. Even when no one is watching, no one is validating you, and no one is clapping. This is what it is. And that takes time. That is not something you can do in 4 sessions. That is not something you can do in 8 sessions. It takes time and it takes practice in what? The real world. This includes taking radical responsibility for your triggers and the choices that you make because of said triggers. This is also important. Like, oh, they triggered me. Like, okay. So someone said I was triggered and then shot someone. Would that be an acceptable excuse? Of course not. Your triggers, your choices based on those triggers. Interrupting familiar but self-sabotaging patterns. Owning how you co-create dynamics. This is huge, especially when we're talking about relationships. You can't always be the victim in your relationships. It's just not possible. There's 50% of you in a relationship and there's 50% of someone else in a relationship. What are you doing to contribute to the good? What are you doing to contribute to the great? And what are you doing to contribute to the terrible? Because trust me, you're doing something. Making different decisions that reflect your growth, not your wounds. And I love that quote that says, speak from the scar, not the wound. I love that quote. And I feel like I've had to remind myself of that recently. It's a really good quote though. And it just means like you speak from the lesson. The scar is the reminder and the lesson. the wound is porous and yucky and emotional and unhealed, basically, right? Fabulous quote. Don't know where it comes from. Fucking great quote. Anyways, and this is huge. Practicing emotional maturity under pressure, not just in theory. And again, this goes back to not intellectualizing things, but being able to correct, self-correct, course correct in real time. This is part of what I always say, respond, don't react. That is what emotional maturity is. It's not lashing out, it's responding. It doesn't mean suppressing how you feel, but it is knowing that there is going to be a moment after this moment, and you can never take back what is said. You can never unsay something that you've said or undo something that you've done, if that makes sense. Now, if you want some examples of how people talk therapy but don't actually live therapy, this is what I would say. I would say there's a lot of therapy talk, but less life integration. If someone says, I'm working on my boundaries, but they're gossiping, they're people pleasing, your words and your life are not aligned. If someone is always the victim, I mean, this is just like annoying, like as a person, not even like in therapy speak. This is just annoying, period. But using vulnerability to control or to always be coddled, like they're always the one having a hard time, needing emotional support, but they don't really know how to show up for others at the same level. They're weaponizing their softness. Like healing isn't linear, but can't have like a calm conflict resolution without like deflecting, crying out, lashing out, being really over the top angry, diverting, like changing the situation into another situation that makes them look good and you look bad. And these are just things to notice, because you might have this little mind fuck where you're like, oh, that's weird. Like, she's in therapy. Why the fuck is she acting like that? And I've definitely had that before. I'm not going to lie. Like, people aren't perfect, but I definitely have these moments where it's like, whoa, like, what are you paying your therapist for? But it's because, again, like, we don't know what's happening when that person is sitting down on that couch. Could be a lot, could be a little. And that's not to judge people's experience. Like, they could be in therapy talking about something completely different. But it's just to kind of explain things when it kind of feels like this doesn't add up to this. And that's because it doesn't. Therapy does not equal like an emotional savant. That's just not the way it works. And like I said, people are in therapy for different reasons, and people also lie in therapy. They want to protect their ego because there's a lot of people that can't even admit things to themselves, let alone admitting it to a therapist. Like I said, they don't want to be judged by the therapist. We view therapists and everyone of that ilk as someone who's an authority, just like how we view teachers and professors, and we don't want to be judged by them. Even though when you think about it, you're like, this makes no sense. I'm here to bare my soul and for them to help me. And how can I be helped if I'm not bearing my soul? But one thing I learned was that just because you know the biology of it doesn't take away the psychology of it, and vice versa. Even if you know the psychology of it, doesn't take away the biology of it. And I thought it was very on point and very astute. So I'll leave you with that. We know what emotional work looks like. Maybe we don't. But I will tell you, first and foremost, it's rarely loud. It's really someone who can apologize full stop, not with a but, not with an asterisk, not with a defensive, like, I'm sorry, I fucked up and I own this. That is real emotional work. Therapy or not, they can absorb hard feedback without necessarily reverting and throwing it back. They can show less defensiveness over time. They can make better and different relationship choices. They can feel secure in your joy without needing to match it. All in all, to say, therapy is a tool in your toolbox. It is not a badge of honor. Not every session will feel like a breakthrough. Not every person who walks the same road as you, i.e. takes therapy, is going to end up in the same place. We're all on our journeys. I made a TikTok recently, I'll link it down below, that there is no such thing as a healed person, because to be human, you are inherently flawed. And there's no such thing as being a healed person. A healed person is a perfect person, and we know perfection does not exist. You are forever on this journey. You may take breaks, you may slide back, but it is something that is always there for you whenever you want it. And the road kind of unravels as you walk it. So not every therapist will be your person, but when everything comes together, it's truly kismet, and it can shift everything in your life and change you truly for the better. Trust me. So whether you're just getting started or you've been in therapy for a while, the truth is it's not really about having a therapist. It's about being able to meet yourself and being willing to meet yourself wherever you are. And I hope that you guys liked this episode. I had no plans to make an episode like this. I have a running list of things that I want to talk about in my phone, and this literally came to me like yesterday, and I was like, I'm going to do an episode on this. I really hope that you guys liked it, and I hope it was informative and educational for you. If you are beginning the therapy journey, haven't even considered it, or are well on your way, I wanted to give some book recommendations that might be worth exploring if, you're a reader girl like me. And I will kind of explain like where they fall into the therapy land. So first, I have to talk about Maybe You Should Talk to Someone by Lori Gottlieb. So guys, this is a great book. I've actually read this book on Audible. I think Lori Gottlieb is absolutely fantastic. She's an amazing therapist. It's her memoir, basically. She talks about her life. It's very funny, but also like deep. I highly recommend on Audible because she does the narration. It's just a great story. She talks about therapy as someone who is a therapist who's also in therapy. And I love that. From what I know, I think that's commonplace. And they always say that a therapist should have a therapist. But if you like memoirs, if you like psychology, but maybe you don't want anything too dense, highly recommend her book. She talks about her life. Like I said, it's a great read. I plowed through the book. Fabulous. I would also say The State of Affairs by Esther Perel. I've mentioned it before. This is really for those in relationships and long-term, serious, like monogamous relationships. If you have ever considered couples therapy, this is a fantastic book. It's very insightful. She talks a lot about things that come up that might be hard to read, especially if you have always kind of been on the straight and narrow, I guess, because the book talks a lot about like affairs. But I do think it's a really interesting book. I think anyone who is in long-term partnership or wants long-term partnership should read this book. I really do. I have lots of highlighted passages from it because I think it's that interesting. Highly, highly, highly recommend. There's also the book Attached by Amir Levine. So this is obviously all about attachment theory. I will say that sometimes we hear things in the world of psychology and stuff like that, and we just take it as Bible. Attachment theory is just that. It's a theory, right? And for those of you that don't know what a theory actually means, I'm going to pull up the definition, which is a supposition or a system of ideas intended to explain something, especially one based on general principles independent of the thing to be explained. Which means, in layman's terms, an idea used to account for a situation or justify a course of action. It is an idea. It is a thesis. It is an idea, which means it is not necessarily a fact. Theories are created from large collections of facts, but theories don't necessarily equate facts. I think I'm getting a little like too in the weeds here, but they're not random guesses either. But yeah. And I say all that to say, when it comes to attachment theory, I think there's something to be said, but I don't take it as like Bible. I don't with love languages either. I mean, that's another conversation for another day because there's a lot to say about the person who came up with love languages and things like that. But yeah, if you're into attachment theory, read Attached, and I think you will be really interested. Next is The Body Keeps Score. So I actually have this book, but I've never read it, by Bessel van Kolk. So this, I think, I was on Amazon the other day, like Audible, and this has been on like its top best-selling list for like 200 weeks or something like that. This is all about trauma and somatic therapy and how the body does not forget. If you have ever experienced trauma, especially physical trauma, PTSD, you need to read this book. The Body Keeps the Score. Sorry, from what I know, is an amazing book. I just haven't dove into it because I think it's an intense read, but highly recommend to anyone that has ever suffered. And it has fantastic reviews. Everyone I know that has ever read it really loves it. There's another book called It Didn't Start With You. This is by Mark Wolynn, and this is all about generational trauma. I mean, great title. It Didn't Start With You. Again, our bodies and our ancestry, there's so much that is like coded and kept that just gets woven through. And if you know anything about like, even from a DNA point of view, like the sperm and the egg, how much that gets traveled through that is actually crazy. So the byline is How Inherited Family Trauma Shapes Who We Are and How to End the Cycle. Again, another one that I haven't read, but if you're in that kind of vibe of self-development, self-actualization, psychology, whatever, you've heard of this book a million times. There's another book called What Happened to You. This is by Oprah and Bruce Perry. This is also on my bookshelf that I haven't read. This is about trauma and neurobiology, so kind of similar to The Body Keeps the Score, but a little bit more accessible because I think it's a lot of Oprah and Bruce Perry going back and forth. Basically, it discussed the impact of trauma and its adverse experiences and how healing must begin with a shift to ask what happened to you rather than what's wrong with you. Lots of reviews. People seem to like this book as well. I haven't read it. I will eventually. It's on the list, guys. They're all on the list. I just need to go off the grid for like a month and read all of these books, like without my phone, like just me and the books. And then finally, this is a book that I only really came across recently, which is insane because this book has been out since the late 80s. Like, I'm very behind here. Very, very, very behind here. But this is The Drama of the Gifted Child. So this is by a Polish psychologist, I think, called Dr. Alice Miller. And basically, it's like, why are the most successful people plagued by feelings of emptiness and alienation? This wise and profound book has provided thousands of readers with an answer and has helped them to apply it to their own lives. Far too many of us had to learn as children to hide our own feelings, needs, and memories skillfully in order to meet our parents' expectations and win their love. The Drama of the Gifted Child helps us to reclaim our life by discovering our crucial needs and our own truth. So this book has been around for a long time, like I said. I think it was originally published in 1979 and then republished in the late 80s. Basically, her theory is that she believes that our emotions are formed in early childhood. If we have happy childhoods, then our emotions develop naturally and we behave in a rational way. However, if our childhoods have been unhappy as a result of physical, sexual, and/or emotional abuse, our emotional world is damaged. I know it sounds fucking grim, guys, but highly recommend, LOL. Just a little light read. The Search for the True Self, light read before you go to bed, LOL. This is actually high on my list, and I really want to buy this book, and I am going to buy it. Highly recommend buying used books on eBay because they're dirt cheap. You don't need to buy a book brand new when someone already read it and donated it. But yeah, this is like next on my list. And apparently it just really talks about deep psychodynamics, but hey, that's kind of my thing. So why not? It's a bit heavy and I don't think it's that long of a book either. So yeah, I'm really interested. I would love to hear from you if this episode resonated with you. DM me your thoughts, your experiences. If you ever felt like you outgrew your therapist or even struggled to find the right one. All of these conversations matter so much, guys, and they're often more helpful than we can even realize. I really hope that you enjoyed this episode. I enjoyed making it. Therapy is something I could talk ad nauseum about. Thank you for listening to the Sage Sorority. If you love us, share this episode with a friend who's maybe just beginning her therapy journey or is a pro and is already through it. I would also love if you go on Spotify or Apple, whichever you prefer, and leave us a 5-star review. It really helps to grow the show. And you know that is the goal here, to spread this message far and wide to our favorite babes. Have a fabulous week, guys. I hope you have a beautiful weekend. And I will be right here next Thursday to chat again. Love you. Bye.